In the autumn of 1882, three young women disappeared from Cedarville Academy in rural Vermont within a single month. Their families were told they had fallen gravely ill and been sent home for recovery, but none of them ever arrived. The only witness to their final moments was a stone tower that had remained locked for decades, its windows boarded shut, its purpose forgotten by all but one woman who held its terrible secrets. Before we uncover the dark truth behind Cedarville Academy's most guarded secret, I want to ask you to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into America's darkest mysteries. Also, let me know in the comments what city and country you're listening from. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories reach. Your support helps us continue bringing you these untold tales from the shadows of history. What you're about to hear draws from fragmented records, whispered testimonies, and documents that survived decades of careful concealment, piecing together a story that few dared to speak aloud. Nestled in the rolling hills of central Vermont, Cedarville Academy stood as a beacon of refinement and moral education for young women of distinguished families. Founded in 1847 by the prominent Cedar family, the institution had earned a reputation throughout New England for transforming wayward daughters into proper ladies of society. The Academy's Gothic revival architecture, with its imposing brick facade and ornate spires, commanded respect from the moment visitors approached its wrought iron gates. The Academy served daughters of wealthy merchants, politicians, and industrialists from Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. Parents sent their girls here not merely for education, but for moral correction, to cure them of modern rebellions against traditional feminine virtues. The curriculum emphasized deportment, religious devotion, domestic skills, and absolute obedience to authority. At the heart of this institution stood Directress Victoria Cedar, granddaughter of the Academy's founder. A woman of severe beauty and unwavering conviction, Victoria had dedicated her life to what she called the sacred duty of feminine reformation. Standing nearly 6 feet tall, with steel-gray hair pulled into an unforgiving bun, she commanded both fear and respect from students and faculty alike. Her piercing blue eyes seemed to see into the very souls of those under her care, identifying weakness and rebellion with unsettling accuracy. The Academy's campus spread across 40 acres of Vermont countryside, with manicured gardens, a chapel, dormitories, and academic buildings connected by covered walkways. But looming over this pastoral scene stood a peculiar structure that had puzzled visitors for decades. A circular stone tower rising 4 stories high, its windows sealed with thick wooden boards, its single door secured with multiple heavy locks. Most curious was the Academy's policy regarding this tower. Students were strictly forbidden from approaching it. Faculty members claimed ignorance of its purpose, and Directress Cedar would only say it housed materials unsuitable for young ladies. The tower's mystery had become part of Academy folklore, whispered about in dormitories but never openly discussed. The autumn of 1882 brought an unusually harsh October to Vermont. Early snows trapped the Academy in isolation, and with that isolation came a series of events that would finally expose the tower's secrets. It began with Margaret Whitmore, a 16-year-old from a Boston banking family who had been sent to Cedarville for her excessive independence and disregard for proper feminine behavior. But on the night of October 15th, Margaret was caught attempting to send an unauthorized letter to a young man back in Boston, a violation of the Academy's strict correspondence rules. The next morning, during chapel service, Directress Cedar announced that Margaret had fallen ill with consumption and been sent home immediately for treatment. However, Sarah Mills, Margaret's roommate, later confided to other students that she had seen Margaret being escorted toward the locked tower just after midnight, her hands bound, her mouth gagged. 2 weeks later, it was Eleanor Thorne's turn. The 17-year-old daughter of a New York politician had been repeatedly disciplined for questioning religious doctrine during theology classes. On October 30th, Eleanor was discovered with a small knife she had stolen from the kitchen. She claimed she needed it to sharpen her pencils, but Directress Cedar declared it evidence of violent tendencies. The next day, Eleanor too had mysteriously fallen ill and been sent home, but it was the disappearance of Christina Vale that finally broke the Academy's carefully maintained facade. Christina, barely 15 and the youngest daughter of a wealthy Philadelphia merchant, had committed the gravest sin in Directress Cedar's eyes. She had been caught in what the directress termed unnatural friendship with another student. On November 12th, Christina was seen being dragged from her dormitory in the early hours of dawn, screaming for help until her voice was silenced by a gag. The Academy's handful of faculty members, all unmarried women dependent on Directress Cedar for their livelihoods, maintained absolute silence about these disappearances. But the students began to talk. Whispered conversations in dormitories revealed a pattern. Girls who violated the Academy's strictest moral codes didn't simply leave, they vanished after being taken to the tower. The tower's sinister reputation stretched back to the Academy's earliest days, but the truth had been carefully buried beneath layers of institutional respectability. According to Martha Henley, the Academy's elderly cook, who had worked there since 1850, the tower had originally been built as a meditation retreat for students requiring intensive moral guidance. In those early years, girls sent to the tower would disappear for weeks at a time, emerging pale, skeletal, and fundamentally changed. They spoke little, ate less, and displayed an almost supernatural obedience to authority. Most disturbing was their eyes. Once bright with youthful rebellion, now dim and lifeless, as if something essential had been extinguished. Martha whispered to trusted students about the sounds that emanated from the tower during those early years. Sobbing that lasted for days, desperate pleas for mercy, and occasionally, the most haunting sound of all, complete silence after weeks of anguished cries. She spoke of girls who entered the tower as vibrant young women and emerged as hollow shells, if they emerged at all. The Academy's reputation for transforming difficult girls had grown throughout New England, but so had disturbing rumors. Former students who had survived their time at Cedarville rarely spoke of their experiences, and those who did often exhibited signs of profound psychological trauma. Several had been committed to private asylums shortly after returning home, babbling about the tower's darkness and Directress Cedar's corrections. By 1870, the tower had been officially sealed, its windows boarded, its door secured with multiple locks. Directress Cedar explained this as a safety measure. The structure had become unstable and dangerous, but Martha knew the truth. Too many parents had begun asking uncomfortable questions about their daughter's condition after leaving the Academy. The tower's activities had been moved underground, quite literally. The harsh winter of 1882 trapped the Academy in near-complete isolation, and with that isolation came carelessness. Directress Cedar, perhaps feeling secure in her remote domain, began to let her guard down. Students noticed increased activity around the sealed tower during the darkest hours of night. Lights flickered behind the boarded windows, and strange sounds echoed across the snowy courtyard. It was during this time that Anne Fletcher, a 17-year-old with a talent for observation and a rebellious streak, began documenting these nocturnal activities. Anne had been sent to Cedarville for intellectual pursuits inappropriate for a young lady. She had been caught reading medical texts and expressing interest in becoming a physician. Her methodical mind and careful attention to detail made her the perfect witness to the Academy's secrets. Through her dormitory window, Anne observed a disturbing pattern. On nights when students disappeared, she would see Directress Cedar and two male figures, later identified as local farmers paid handsomely for their silence, carrying bundles toward the tower. These bundles were always human-shaped, always still, and always smaller when they were carried out hours later. Anne's investigations led her to discover that the tower's basement connected to a network of underground chambers that extended beneath the Academy's chapel. These subterranean spaces, originally built as root cellars and storage areas, had been converted into something far more sinister. The sounds that echoed through the Academy at night weren't coming from the sealed tower above, they were rising from the depths below. Working with Margaret Sinclair, her roommate and the daughter of a prominent Boston journalist, Anne began gathering evidence. They collected testimonies from other students, documented the patterns of disappearances, and most crucially, discovered a way to access the underground chambers through a forgotten entrance in the chapel's basement. On the night of December 3rd, 1882, Anne and Margaret made their descent into the Academy's hidden depths. What they discovered would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The underground chambers had been converted into a series of cells, each no larger than a closet, with thick stone walls and heavy wooden doors reinforced with iron bars. The air was thick with the stench of human waste, decay, and something else, the sweet, sickening smell of death. As their candle flickered in the darkness, they could hear sounds that made their blood freeze. Weak moaning, the rattle of chains, and desperate scratching against stone walls. Someone, perhaps multiple people, was still alive down here. In the first cell they peered into, they found Christina Vale. The once vibrant 15-year-old was now a skeletal figure, her hair matted, her clothes reduced to filthy rags. She had been chained to the wall by her ankles, with just enough freedom to reach a bucket of water and scraps of moldy bread. When she saw the girls, she tried to speak, but could only produce a hoarse whisper. "Help me, please. I want to go home." The second cell contained Eleanor Thorne, but Eleanor was beyond help. She lay motionless on the stone floor, her body emaciated, her eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. She had been dead for several days, but her body remained chained to the wall, a grim warning to the other prisoners. But it was the third cell that revealed the true scope of Directress Cedar's crimes. Margaret Whitmore sat in the corner, but she was no longer the defiant girl who had tried to send a love letter. Weeks of starvation, isolation, and psychological torture had broken her completely. She rocked back and forth, muttering prayers in a voice devoid of all emotion, her mind apparently shattered beyond repair. As Anne and Margaret tried to process what they were seeing, they heard footsteps in the corridor above. Directress Cedar was making her nightly rounds, and she was not alone. The girls extinguished their candle and pressed themselves against the cold stone wall, hearts pounding as they listened to the directress's voice echoing through the chambers. "The Fleming girl requires additional correction," Victoria's cold voice announced. "Her defiance persists despite 3 weeks of treatment. Increase her restrictions, no food for 48 hours, and add the iron collar for proper humility." What Anne and Margaret witnessed next would expose the full horror of Cedarville Academy's moral correction program. They watched as Directress Cedar, accompanied by 2 burly local men who served as her enforcers, entered Christina's cell. The 15-year-old girl was dragged to the center of the chamber, where a series of medieval-looking devices awaited. Directress Cedar's method was methodical and calculated. She believed that physical suffering would purify the soul, that starvation would eliminate sinful desires, and that complete isolation would break rebellious spirits. Her treatments included prolonged fasting, forced labor in chains, psychological torture through isolation and darkness, and physical punishments that grew increasingly severe with each perceived act of defiance. The Academy's basement contained evidence of years of systematic abuse, and discovered a ledger hidden in Directress Cedar's private chamber that documented every girl who had been subjected to intensive correction since 1850. The entries were clinical and cold, describing each girl's moral defects and the treatments prescribed to cure them. The ledger revealed that 43 girls had died during their correction over the past 32 years. Their deaths had been carefully covered up. Bodies were secretly buried in the academy's grounds, and families were told their daughters had succumbed to various illnesses and been interred locally due to weather conditions preventing transport home. Most chilling were Directress Cedar's personal notes about her methods. She viewed herself as a divine instrument, chosen to purge young women of their sinful nature. She believed that breaking their bodies would save their souls, and that death during the process was simply God's way of calling the irredeemable home. As Anne read these horrific records, she heard Christina's weak voice calling from her cell, "The others, in the walls." They never left. Following the girls' desperate gestures, Anne discovered that sections of the basement walls had been bricked up in recent years. Behind these walls were the preserved remains of girls who had died during their correction, their bodies mummified by the cold, dry conditions of the underground chambers. Anne Fletcher's courage in documenting these crimes would ultimately bring justice to Cedarville Academy, though not without tremendous personal cost. On December 15, 1882, she managed to escape the academy during a blizzard, carrying with her Christina Vale, who barely survived the journey, and crucial evidence of Directress Cedar's crimes. Anne's father, a prominent Boston attorney, immediately contacted federal authorities and the Vermont State Police. The subsequent investigation revealed the full scope of the academy's horrors. 43 bodies were recovered from the basement chambers and hidden graves around the property. Directress Victoria Cedar was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and operating a criminal enterprise. The trial that followed shocked New England society. Testimonies from surviving victims revealed decades of systematic torture and murder disguised as moral education. Several prominent families who had sent daughters to the academy faced public scandal when their complicity in ignoring warning signs was exposed. Directress Cedar showed no remorse during her trial, maintaining that she had been doing God's work by purifying corrupt souls. She was convicted on all counts and sentenced to death, though she died in prison before the sentence could be carried out. Some said from natural causes, others whispered it was suicide rather than face public execution. The Cedarville Academy was permanently closed in 1883. The building stood empty for decades before being demolished in 1920. Today, a small memorial park marks the site with a simple plaque that reads, "In memory of the innocent lives lost here. May they rest in peace, and may their suffering never be forgotten." Anne Fletcher never fully recovered from what she witnessed in those underground chambers. She spent the remainder of her life advocating for reforms in educational institutions and women's rights, but she was haunted by nightmares of the tower's secrets until her death in 1934. Her detailed journals, donated to the Vermont Historical Society, remain the most complete record of one of America's most horrific institutional scandals. The case of Cedarville Academy serves as a stark reminder of how easily authority can corrupt and how institutions designed to protect the vulnerable can become instruments of unimaginable cruelty. In an era when young women had few rights and fewer voices, Directress Cedar exploited society's trust to commit crimes that defied human comprehension. This mystery shows us the importance of questioning authority, protecting the vulnerable, and ensuring that those in positions of power are held accountable for their actions. What do you think about this dark chapter in American educational history? Do you believe there might be other institutions with similar hidden secrets? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this investigation compelling and want to hear more stories about America's hidden horrors, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and share this video with someone who appreciates true crime history. Until next time, remember that the darkest secrets are often hidden in plain sight.